Get off this land right now. My son needs it more than you. The shrill voice of the woman echoed across the quiet ranch. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights pierced through the peaceful evening as two sheriff cruisers pulled up the gravel driveway. I was still standing near my barn, sweat dripping from my forehead after a long day of work, when the deputy stepped out and said the words I never imagined hearing. Sir, we got a call from a resident of the HOA claiming you're squatting on this land. She says it belongs to her son. I blinked. What? Behind him, storming out of her black luxury SUV, came the woman I had only heard about in whispers around the neighborhood. Karen Baxter, the loudest, most entitled member of the HOA board. Her hands were planted on her hips, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, and her voice rising in pitch with every step. My son has a job in tech, she yelled to the deputies. He deserves this peaceful ranch lifestyle. This man has no right to be here. My HOA voted on it. I nearly dropped my hammer. I'm sorry. What does that even mean? Karen didn't blink. We've decided you should move. My son's moving in next week. Pack up. One deputy shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, that's not how property law works. Oh, please, she snapped. He's old, probably lonely, probably trespassing. I looked them dead in the eye and said the one sentence that silenced everyone. I built this ranch from scratch. It's my land fully paid for, and I've got the deed inside. Karen's eyes narrowed. We'll see what the HOA lawyers say. But even as she barked into her phone, I could tell this wasn't about rules. This was personal. And as the second deputy pulled me aside to quietly ask for identification and proof of ownership, something in my gut told me this was just the beginning. What I didn't know then was how far Karen was willing to go. Let me take you back to where this all started. Hi there, my name's Mike Hargrove. I'm 63, retired firefighter, widower hour, and proud owner of Pine Meadow Ranch. 25 acres of peace, trees, a small vineyard, 3 horses, and 2 overly friendly goats named Marvin and Beans. After 30 years serving my community in Sacramento, I bought this land with my late wife, Lisa's life insurance after she passed from cancer. It was her dream for us to live somewhere quiet, and after she was gone, I made sure that dream didn't die too. I never planned to get into any trouble. I keep to myself, plant wildflowers along the trail, help neighbors with their fences, and bake the best apple pies you'll ever taste. That's why when the HOA popped up near the road about 5 years ago, right after a large real estate group built some luxury homes nearby, I didn't think much of it. They weren't supposed to affect me. I'm not in the HOA jurisdiction. I live way outside it. But apparently no one told Karen Baxter that Karen had moved into one of the new homes with her son Derek, a 30-something tech bro who walked around in loafers and linen shirts like he was the second coming of Elon Musk. Derek didn't care much for talking, just sneered, and always looked like he had more important things to do. Karen, though, she took entitled to Olympic levels. The first time I met her, I had driven down to the neighborhood store in my muddy Ford pickup. She walked past me in the parking lot, glanced at my boots, and muttered, "Why do they let people like that live around here?" That should have been a warning. Weeks later, she sent me a notice. Yes, a printed, laminated, and color-coded notice saying I had violated neighborhood aesthetic standards by allowing my fence to be rustic and unsightly. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee on the paper. But then came more letters. One complained about the scent of barn animals wafting into her yard, despite her house being nearly half a mile from my property. Another said I had illegally placed my wooden welcome sign, claiming it disturbed her morning meditative walk. I ignored them all, but the situation grew darker when she realized her HOA powers couldn't reach me. That's when she started showing up in person. One afternoon, I saw her white SUV parked near my mailbox. She stood on the edge of my land in her pastel sweater, snapping photos on her phone like she was gathering evidence for a murder case. I walked over trying to be civil. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "No," she said without looking at me, "just documenting the area. I have plans for this spot." That chilled me. "I own this land," I reminded her gently. She raised her eyebrow. Not for long. I walked back to my house, that weird feeling tightening in my chest. Fast forward 2 weeks later, and the sheriff showed up on my land. Apparently, Karen called 911 saying I was a squatter, said the land belonged to her son and that I was violently resisting HOA relocation orders. Her words, not mine. The deputies came, yes, but instead of finding a wild squatter, they found a retired firefighter planting tomatoes in overalls with dirt under his nails and a mug of sweet tea on the porch. Still, they were required to take the claim seriously. As I walked inside to grab the deed, Karen marched toward my barn and began yelling that she'd get the HOA board involved, that she had spoken with a senator about cleaning out old folks wasting land, and that her son needed the ranch to reset his mental health. I came back with the paperwork. The deputies read it carefully. One looked at me and gave a quiet nod. "You're good, sir. No worries." But Karen wasn't done. She stood in the middle of my ranch, dialed someone on speakerphone, and began screaming, "Call the HOA attorney. I want this man out. I'm calling Channel 6 News." I'll admit I was stunned. I had seen a lot in my life. Fires, floods, even pulled people out of wrecks. But nothing prepared me for a woman standing on my land, calling the news because her adult son wanted to live on a ranch that was never his. That evening, after the deputies left, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset. Marvin and Beans wandered up and nudged my knees like they knew something was wrong. I had two options: fight back quietly or expose her in front of the entire HOA community. I hadn't made up my mind yet until I received a letter the next morning that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a threat. It was an eviction notice, and it had a forged signature at the bottom claiming I had agreed to sell the ranch to Karen Baxter's son. Where are you watching from, folks? Because trust me, this story's about to get real. I stood on my porch with the so-called eviction notice in my hand, the paper shaking slightly as the early morning wind brushed past. The forged document had my full name, my ranch address, and a fake signature that looked nothing like mine. But to the untrained eye, it could pass. It claimed that I had agreed to transfer the title of Pine Meadow Ranch to Derek Baxter, Karen's son, effective immediately. At the bottom, it had an HOA stamp that looked official and a type name: Karen Baxter, HOA President Prom. My jaw clenched. Now, I don't scare easy. 30 years running into burning buildings will teach you to stay calm under pressure. But this was personal. Someone had faked my name on a legal document and sent it to my mailbox in a bold manila envelope. That wasn't petty. That was criminal. I didn't panic. I just picked up the phone. I called my old buddy Rick Mendoza. Rick and I went way back. He was a detective back in the day, retired a few years before me, and we used to swap stories over barbecue and poker nights. Rick now worked part-time as a private investigator. I read him the letter word for word, and his response was short and sharp. "That's felony-level forgery. Mike, don't throw that letter away. I'll be there in an hour." I made 2 fresh mugs of coffee and waited on the porch. Exactly 45 minutes later, Rick's dusty black Dodge pulled up. He stepped out, wore jeans and a flannel shirt, same as always, and walked with the same slow, thoughtful pace he'd always had during investigations. I handed him the letter. He read it, then took out his phone and snapped pictures of every page. "This ain't just a prank," he said, pointing at the HOA stamp. "That's a scanned image, and that fake notary at the bottom doesn't exist. Already looked him up on the state registry. Someone's going down for this." Rick suggested we document everything, every interaction, every message, every sudden appearance of Karen or Derek. He even dropped a few small security cameras around my porch and driveway, just in case someone tried anything funny. That evening, I tried to go back to normal, fed the horses, watered the vineyard, grilled up some ribs. But just as I was settling into my recliner to watch a classic Western, the front gate camera pinged on my phone. Someone was standing outside my gate. Not Karen, Derek. It was the first time I saw him alone. He stood there with a smug grin, his arms crossed like he was posing for a tech company's LinkedIn banner. I stepped out. "Can I help you?" I asked through the bars of the ranch gate. He smiled wider. "Just checking out my new property. Going to put a Tesla charger right over there," he said, pointing toward my rose garden. "And maybe turn your barn into a smart workspace. My mom says I can use the vineyard to host influencer retreats." My fist balled at my side. "Let me be real clear," I said. "You or your mother step foot on this land again without permission, It's trespassing, and this land not for sale. Never was, never will be. Derek shrugged. Guess we'll let the lawyers figure that out. Then he pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures of my home, like he was already planning the furniture layout. The next day, things went quiet. Too quiet. But I knew the storm was coming. Sure enough, by the weekend, 3 HOA board members showed up at the foot of my driveway. They didn't come past the gate. Maybe they knew better. All dressed in polo shirts and khakis, clipboards in hand. One of them, a nervous woman named Patty, waved. Mr. Hargrove, we've received a motion from Mrs. Baxter regarding your property. She claims you've agreed to rezone and donate a portion of your land for community wellness use. I almost laughed. Come wellness? Patty nodded. A meditation retreat, yoga field, a place for sustainable living demonstrations. She says it's part of a green initiative. She even said you offered to help mentor local students with your farming knowledge. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them I never signed anything. I even showed them a photocopy of the forged notice and said I had a private investigator involved. That was when the second man, a tall guy with a goatee named Brett, stepped back and said, Wait, are you saying that document isn't real? Patty looked stunned. Karen said you mailed it yourself. She lied, I said. That shook them. But not Karen. That evening, as I watched the sky turn orange over the hills, her SUV rolled by slowly, windows down, music playing. She didn't stop, just smiled, nodded at my camera, and kept going. I had never seen a smile look so threatening. I began making copies of everything. Paperwork, photos, Rick's notes, even the gate cam footage of Derek talking like he owned the place. I put everything into a big red binder labeled evidence and left another set with Rick. Then came the next low moment. I received a letter from the county office. It said that someone had submitted a zoning adjustment request for my land, saying it would be repurposed for public access under a wellness grant funded by the HOA's private initiative. It listed Derek Baxter as the new applicant. I froze. This wasn't just about getting me to leave anymore. They were trying to legally remove me using forged documents and lies to county officials. I immediately drove down to the county office with my real deed identity documents and Rick at my side. The clerk there, thankfully, was a sharp guy named Dennis who took one look at the request, then said, Yeah, this feels off. It came through fast and it wasn't signed in person. He agreed to put a hold on it and flag it for fraud investigation. As we walked back to my truck, Rick said, They're playing dirty now. We need to be one step ahead. And if she's calling 911 once, she'll do it again. He was right because that night around 11 p.m., I heard pounding on my front door. I opened it, flashlight in hand, and froze. 2 unformed officers stood on my porch. Mr. Harrove, the lead officer, said, We got a report of a disturbance and possible elder abuse happening on this property. Caller said an elderly man was being forced to live in unsafe conditions and may be held against his will by squatters. My voice caught in my throat. She actually called that in. She didn't just call. The second officer said, She's out front right now. I stepped outside and saw Karen at the edge of the driveway, waving like she was hosting a 4th of July BBQ. Did she say I was the victim? I asked. The officer nodded slowly. Yes, sir. We're required to check on all reports involving seniors. Mind if we come in? I let them in. We walked through my tidy living room, my kitchen, the framed pictures of Lisa and our kids on the walls. I showed them my fireman badge and my ranch ownership papers. I even opened the fridge so they could see it wasn't some weird hostage situation. They looked embarrassed. Sorry, sir. We see this sort of thing sometimes, usually in HOA disputes, but we have to follow up. They left within 20 minutes. But Karen, she stayed outside sipping from a thermos, like she was the one doing me a favor. I closed the door, heart pounding. She had gone from forged documents to zoning scams to 911 weaponization, and yet she wasn't done. Because the very next morning, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws right outside my vineyard. And when I ran outside to see who it was, I saw 3 strange men in neon vests tearing through my fence with electric saws and a sign truck waiting behind them with a wooden board that read, Coming soon, the Derek Baxter Eco-Healing Retreat. Hey, get off my property. I shouted so loud my throat burned. The sound of chainsaws stopped instantly. Three men in neon safety vests froze. One of them, a guy with a beard and reflective sunglasses, looked over his shoulder like a kid caught stealing cookies. "You the owner?" he asked casually, like they hadn't just chopped straight through my vineyard fence. I jogged over, still in my pajama pants and boots, holding my phone up. "You're damn right I'm the owner, and I'm recording everything. Who hired you?" The guy scratched his head. Some lady named Karen, HOA, sent us. We got a work order here for land clearing and signage. Said it's been approved." He handed me a clipboard with a crumpled paper attached. The words looked official, printed with fake stamps, and once again had my name on it. Authorized by Michael Hargrove. It read, except the signature, still fake, still sloppy, still not mine. I shook my head in disbelief. "This is fraud. You're trespassing. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the real police, not Karen's drama hotline." They looked at each other. The guy with the beard shrugged. "Man, we just do what we're paid for." I took pictures of them, their license plates, and the clipboard. Then I held up my phone again. "This video is being sent to the sheriff's office and my lawyer." That got their attention. One by one, they packed up their tools, mumbled apologies, and got back in their truck. I watched them drive off down the long, dusty road, the sign still strapped to the back of their trailer. "Eco Healing Retreat." My foot. Rick arrived 20 minutes later. I showed him everything. The fake work order, the wrecked part of the fence, and the gash through the edge of my vineyard. "She's getting bold," he muttered, "and sloppy. These forged documents all have the same print pattern. I've started a folder. We're going to nail her." But even Rick looked worried now. The vineyard damage alone would cost thousands. And what if they'd come while I wasn't home? What if they'd poisoned the soil or stolen equipment? What if next time they didn't knock down my fence but came straight for my home? I felt like I was being hunted on my own land. That night I sat on the porch with Marvin and Beans curled up nearby. I stared out at the quiet hills, wondering if this was what Lisa meant when she said the world was changing. Still, I wasn't leaving. This land was ours, her dream, my peace, and I would protect it. The next day I drove into town to see a real estate attorney named Susan Brennan. Rick had worked with her on a zoning case last year. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had a background in land law. She listened to everything I said, flipped through the evidence binder, and nodded slowly. "She's trying to create a false paper trail." Susan said, "If she fakes enough documents, it might trick county officers or even a judge into believing your land was transferred willingly, but we're catching it early." She handed me a pen. "First, we're going to file a cease and desist against Karen Baxter and Derek Baxter. That will legally bar them from stepping foot on your land or representing your property in any way. Next, she said we'd draft a formal complaint to the HOA board and then a fraud report to the district attorney's office. If we could prove Karen was behind the forgery, she could face felony charges." "Good," I said, "because she needs to learn she can't bully people into giving up their lives." Back at the ranch, I reinforced the fence and added 2 more cameras near the vineyard. I also had motion sensors installed near the barn. Derek hadn't been seen since the chainsaw stunt, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. Then came the small wind. 2 days later, HOA board member Patty returned with another man, Tim, who apparently had been unaware of everything going on. They stood at the gate again, this time holding coffee cups and looking guilty. "Mr. Harrov," Patty began, "we just want to say we didn't know. Karen didn't tell us about the fake documents or the 911 calls. She said you were on board with everything." "She's lying," I said. Tim nodded. "We know that now, and between you and me, she's been removed from some committee duties while we investigate. Some residents have started asking questions." It was a small crack in the wall, but I wasn't foolish enough to celebrate yet. Karen wasn't the type to quit, especially not when the illusion of power was threatened. Sure enough, that weekend, I received another surprise. I was finishing up repairs on the fence when I heard tires on gravel again. Not a sheriff's cruiser, not Karen's SUV. A sleek white sedan pulled up and out stepped a man in a tailored suit with a briefcase in hand. "Mr. Hargrove," he called politely. "Yes." He handed me a letter sealed in a legal envelope. "You've been served. It was a lawsuit filed by the Baxter family claiming I had breached a written agreement and refused entry to the rightful new owner of the property. They were demanding $450,000 in damages plus immediate turnover of the land for health and wellness development. I stared at the letter. My hands shook. This wasn't a prank. This was real. Karen had taken the lies to court. And the kicker, the court date was set just 10 days away. I looked up, and the man was already walking back to his car. "Good luck," he said like he was handing out a birthday card. As I stood there in the dust, holding the letter in my calloused hands, I felt something deep inside me stir. Something I hadn't felt since I was fighting wildfires on the edge of the Sierra foothills. A switch flipped. I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to expose every lie. Because if Karen thought she could bully a retired fire captain off his own land with fake papers, dirty tricks, and spoiled entitlement, she was in for the fight of her life. And as I turned to walk back into the house to call Susan and Rick, I noticed something out of place. A small drone hovering just above the barn recording me. I grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it straight at the drone. It buzzed upward, dodged, and zipped off toward the tree ant like a startled wasp. But I had seen enough. Sleek black body, tiny blinking red light, and a camera lens staring dead at me. She was spying on me now. I stood in the driveway, breathing heavy, eyes scanning the sky as if more machines were about to drop down from the clouds. Then I turned and stormed into the house. Susan answered on the first ring. "She's escalated," I said. "You mean the lawsuit?" "No, I mean she's got a drone watching me." "Silence then. That's a violation of privacy. You're not in HOA airspace, and you're on private land. We can file a civil injunction on top of everything else." I called Rick next. Within the hour, he was on my porch again, this time with a high-powered lens camera and binoculars. He scanned the sky and found nothing, but he pointed out faint tracks in the dirt near the fence line. Someone had parked a bike or ATV just behind the trees. "They're closer than you think," he muttered. "Karen's not just being entitled anymore. She's being calculated." That evening, Rick installed a drone jammer near the barn roof and motion-triggered lights along the vineyard path. We set up a laptop to catch any digital signatures that passed near the sensors. Then we sat on the porch drinking coffee and waiting for anything to happen. Sure enough, just after midnight, a small blinking light rose from behind the oak trees again. Rick tapped the jammer. The drone twitched midair, spun like it was dizzy, and dropped like a rock onto my gravel driveway. We ran over. The body was cracked, the lens broken, but the memory card still inside. Rick grinned. "We just got ourselves a live feed partner." He took the card back to his truck and plugged it into his laptop, and what we saw made my stomach drop. Footage of me walking the fence line, sitting on the porch, feeding the animals, even inside my barn, clearly taken through a crack in the door. She had likely been flying that drone over my property for days. Worse, there was audio, Karen's voice. "Just get some footage of him yelling or pushing something. If we make it look like he's aggressive, the judge will lean our way." "My son has anxiety. We can use that." Another clip played, Derek's voice sneering. "He's old. Just push him till he cracks. We'll say he got violent." Rick turned to me, furious. "That's witness tampering and video manipulation. She's trying to bait you into looking unstable." I nodded slowly. "But we have her voice now." Rick smiled darkly. "We have her plan." By morning, I sent the footage straight to Susan. She nearly choked when she heard the audio. "This changes everything," she said. "Not only can we stop the lawsuit, we can file counterclaims for harassment, trespassing, and malicious prosecution." I finally had leverage. But it wasn't over yet. Karen still showed up every day at the edge of the road. She'd park, roll down her window, and just watch. Sometimes she brought lawn chairs. Once she even brought a picnic basket like she was tailgating a football game. Then 3 days before the court date, I received a call from someone unexpected. HOA Board President, Mr. Gerald Morgan, Mr. Harove. He said politely, "I'd like to meet privately." I agreed. He came out the next morning wearing jeans and a blazer. Tall man in his 60s with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone used to calming fires. We sat on the porch with sweet tea. Marvin nudged his hand and Gerald laughed. I apologize for everything you've been put through, he said. I've only recently learned the full story. Karen's been less than honest with the board. He went on to say that several residents had filed complaints about her. The board was conducting an internal review. You're not the only one she's targeted, he said. She tried to get an elderly couple removed for painting their door teal instead of charcoal. He looked me in the eye. But this with the drone, the forged signatures, the 911 call, this goes beyond HOA behavior. It's criminal. I nodded, and I'm going to court with it. Gerald handed me an envelope. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA board stating that Karen Baxter had been suspended indefinitely from all board activities pending legal review. It wasn't justice yet, but it was a start. That night I slept for the first time in days, but the peace didn't last. The next morning I walked out to find a burn mark in the middle of my driveway, a black patch of scorched earth where someone had lit a fire. Right next to it, sprayed in bright red paint across my barn wall, were the words, "Get out, old man." My heart pounded. I rushed to the barn. Nothing was burned inside, just the driveway. Rick came out within the hour. "That's arson intimidation," he said. "It's a message." He found tire tracks again, this time leading out the back way through a gap in the trees. "I'll bet you anything. This was Derek," he said. "Karen's being watched now, but her son, he's unhinged." We cleaned the barn wall together, painted over the graffiti, and replaced the scorched gravel with new stone. But I had made my decision. I wasn't backing down. The court date was only 2 days away now, and I was walking in with a binder full of evidence, a drone memory card, a lawyer who was ready for war, and a neighborhood that had finally started to see the truth. Still that night, just as the sun dipped behind the trees, I got a knock at my front door. It wasn't Rick. It wasn't Susan. It was Derek standing there alone, and in his hand, he held a revolver. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at the gun in Derek's hand. Silver steel, dull in the porch light, but deadly all the same. His other hand was shaking slightly. Whether from nerves or something else, I couldn't tell. He wasn't smiling this time. "Don't worry," he said quickly, voice low. "I'm not going to use it. Unless you make me." I didn't blink. "You brought a gun to an old man's porch." He glanced around nervously. "You don't get it, Mr. Hardrove. You've ruined everything. My mom, she promised me this land. Said it was handled. Said you were signing it over. I already made a deal with some investors. This ranch was going to be the centerpiece of my startup." I took a breath, slowly, calmly. A startup built on lies and forged signatures. He ignored me. His voice cracked. "I sunk money into this. My mom took out a second mortgage for legal fees. I told people it was mine. I can't back out now." I moved one step closer, not fast, not threatening, just enough to show him I wasn't scared. "This land was never for sale, Derek, and it never will be. What you're doing now, this isn't desperation. It's a felony. Armed intimidation. Do you want to throw your whole life away over land that was never yours?" He shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. The gun trembled. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand what it's like to fail. She told me if I didn't make this work, I'd be just like my father. Useless." That hit me harder than I expected. I saw a flicker of something human in his eyes. Broken pride, a young man stretched too thin by the weight of a controlling mother and unrealistic expectations. It didn't excuse anything, but it made the moment heavier. "Listen to me, son," I said gently. "Put that gun down. You still have time to fix this. Walk away from this porch. You're not your mother, and you're not your father. You don't have to be either. Just be decent." He looked at me for a long time. Then slowly he lowered the gun. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He set it on the porch rail, stepped back, and wiped his face with his sleeve. "She's not going to stop, you know, even if I do." I nodded. "I know. That's why I'm taking her to court." Without another word, Derek turned and walked back into the night. I stood frozen for a full minute before scooping the revolver up with a rag and locking it in my safe. Then I called Rick and the sheriff. The deputies arrived within the hour. I gave my statement, handed them the gun, and showed the porch camera footage. They took it seriously. One of them radioed in that a unit would be sent to Karen's home immediately for questioning. That night's sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing Derek's voice in my head. She's not going to stop. And she didn't, because the next day, court day, Karen showed up in full force. She came in a long beige trench coat, her son by her side, and a smug smile on her face like she was about to collect a prize. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. The courtroom was small, clean with wooden benches, and a judge who looked like she'd seen too many HOA battles in her lifetime. Susan was fierce. She laid out every piece of evidence: the forged eviction notice, the drone footage, the zoning request, the HOA board letters, and even a signed affidavit from the county clerk confirming the signature on the zoning paperwork was not mine. Then came the video clip. We played it on the small monitor. Karen's voice, loud and clear, instructing someone to make it look like he's aggressive and her son agreeing to push him till he cracks. The judge's jaw tightened. Karen tried to object. "That's out of context." Susan calmly turned to her. "Would you like us to play the rest?" Karen went quiet. Then came the moment that sealed it. The sheriff entered the courtroom and approached the bench with a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the revolver and a report confirming Derek had confessed to bringing it to my porch. He had admitted everything, said he was pressured, desperate, and manipulated by his mother. The judge reviewed everything. Then she banged her gavel and ruled in my favor. All claims against Mr. Hargrove are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, criminal charges may be pursued by the district attorney's office for forgery, harassment, and attempted intimidation. This court will issue a restraining order preventing Karen or Derek Baxter from contacting or approaching Mr. Hargrove or his property indefinitely. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just closed my eyes and let out a slow, deep breath. It was over, or so I thought. But as we exited the courthouse, something caught my eye. Karen wasn't going home. She was being led away in handcuffs. 2 deputies flanked her, reading her rights as she shouted, "You can't do this to me. I was protecting my son. That land was always meant to be ours." Derek just stood there pale and silent as his mother was loaded into the cruiser. I turned to Susan. "What just happened?" She smiled faintly. "They moved fast. Charges for forgery and filing false documents were submitted this morning. Seems the DA wasn't impressed with her little startup vision." Rick walked up beside us and clapped me on the shoulder. "Told you justice would come, old man. You stood your ground." I looked out toward the distant hills. The piece of Pine Meadow Ranch was finally safe. Lisa's dream, my promise, and everything we had built had survived. But I still had one more thing to do. Later that week, I mailed Derek a letter. Inside it, I didn't write hate or threats. I just wrote this: "If you ever want to learn to grow something honest, the kind that feeds your soul, not your ego, my door's open. Just come without lies, without lawyers, and without drones. I'll teach you how to build, not steal. Because kindness isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest weapon we have. And Pine Meadow Ranch, it's still mine, still home, still standing. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if someone called 911 and tried to steal your home for their own child? Let me know in the comments. And remember, never underestimate an old man with a strong will and a solid fence." Peace returned to Pine Meadow Ranch. But it was a different kind of peace now. The kind that hums low like a warning drum beneath quiet skies. The kind that watches the gate even when it's closed. 2 weeks had passed since the court victory. Karen was behind bars awaiting trial on multiple felony charges: fraud, trespassing, filing false documents, and harassment. Her HOA title was stripped, her name scrubbed from their website, and her luxury SUV repossessed shortly after. Apparently, she'd racked up legal debt and bounced several HOA checks trying to finance her wellness project. Derek, he disappeared after the courthouse scene. Rumor had it he left town, fled to Portland or Denver or some other place where nobody knew what he'd done. I didn't hear from him, didn't expect to, and that was fine. I had enough to focus on. The fence was rebuilt, stronger now. The vineyard was slowly healing from the cuts of careless chainsaws. And every time I walked past the barn, I made sure to pat Marvin and Beans on the head. My goats, still loyal, still nosy, still calm, in a world that wasn't. Rick stopped by often. So did Susan, who'd become a bit of a local hero after the case. We shared coffee, patched broken porch rails, and joked about printing no HOA trespassing shirts for fun. I thought it was over until one cold morning in late October. I went out to feed the horses and found something pinned to my front gate. It wasn't a letter. It was a baby blue envelope taped tightly with one word written in black marker. Sorry. I opened it slowly. Inside was a simple handwritten note. No name, just 5 lines. I was wrong about everything. I let fear and pride ruin people's lives. You showed me strength without cruelty. Thank you for not calling me a monster. I'm trying to be better. I just wanted you to know. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it into my pocket. I knew it was Derek. There were no cameras, no signature, no threat, just an honest confession left quietly like a leaf drifting down from an autumn tree. That small gesture, so different from the screaming lawsuits and guns, meant more than I could say. But life wasn't done throwing surprises, because that same week I received a call from a news outlet. The local NBC affiliate wanted to interview me on record. They'd heard about the HOA case, the forged documents, the attempted land theft, and how a retired firefighter stood his ground. I hesitated at first, but then I remembered how many people lived in fear of their HOA. Good folks who got bullied over mailbox colors or porch furniture, people who didn't have a Rick or a Susan to back them up. So, I agreed. The interview aired that Friday night. They came to the ranch, filmed the hills, the vineyard, and me, walking Marvin down the dirt path like a proud father. I told him everything, but I kept Derek's name out of it. I fought to protect my peace, I said, not to destroy someone else's. The story went viral in the state. Overnight, I got dozens of emails, letters, even gift baskets. Strangers thanking me for standing up to HOA tyranny. A man from Texas wrote to say I'd inspired him to challenge a fine for building a chicken coop. A woman in Oregon said she cried when I read the sorry note on air. But not all messages were friendly. Karen had a few friends left, and they weren't happy. Anonymous emails started coming in. You stole a young man's future. That land should have gone to someone who could do something real with it. Retired doesn't mean entitled. One of them even said, "Careful, old man. Trees fall when the wind shifts." I saved them all, sent them to Rick, who traced their IPs, and found most came from a laptop belonging to Karen's cousin, a woman living 4 blocks from me. Rick paid her a quiet visit. The email stopped after that. Still, I had to tighten security. I put up a new sign at the edge of my land. Private ranch, not part of any HOA trespassers, will be recorded, reported, and rebuked with kindness and legal action. People loved it. Someone even turned it into a bumper sticker. But as the days turned cooler and the leaves began to fall, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. Real deep, satisfying closure. One crisp Sunday morning, I visited Lisa's grave under the old cedar tree. I brought fresh sunflowers and poured her a cup of tea beside mine like I always did. "I kept the land, babe," I whispered, and I didn't lose myself doing it. I sat there quietly, the wind rustling the trees, Marvin chewing grass beside me like a 4-legged bodyguard. And just when I was about to leave, a small car pulled up the road. I stood up slowly, cautious. The door opened. Derek stepped out. No suit, no smirk, just jeans, a hoodie, and tired eyes. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," he said. I wanted to say it to your face." I crossed my arms, waited. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were right. I was chasing something I didn't earn. I let her control everything, my choices, my future, and I'm trying to take that back." He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a packet of grape seeds. "Your vineyard inspired me," he said. "I've started volunteering at a community garden, helping kids plant things instead of pitching apps. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you'll accept this." I looked at the packet, then back at him. After a long pause, I nodded once. "Next spring," I said. "You come back. I'll show you how to grow vines that last." He smiled. "A real one this time." And without another word, he got back in his car and drove away. I turned back to Lisa's grave and chuckled. You'd like him better now. As I walked back to the house with Marvin, sunflowers, and hope in my heart, I realized something deeper than justice had bloomed here. A lesson. Land is valuable, yes, but peace is priceless. And once you fought for it, No HOA, no fake cop, no paper threat can take it away. Spring came early that year. The frost melted quicker than usual, and the wildflowers bloomed like they had something to prove. Birds sang louder, the sky seemed wider, and Pine Meadow Ranch, scarred but healing, stood proudly under the California sun. I'd patched every fence, repainted the barn, and replanted the corner of my vineyard that had been torn apart by Karen's hired crew. The grapevines were sprouting fresh green shoots now, and the bees had returned to the garden beds by the porch. But something else was growing too. Hope, the kind that doesn't show up all at once, but creeps in slowly, like light under a closed door. Derek returned in early March, just like he promised. Not in a fancy car or carrying startup brochures this time, just in an old pickup with mud on the tires and work gloves in his back pocket. He didn't knock on the door. He waited by the gate like a man asking permission. I walked over and opened it. "You still got those seeds?" I asked. He held up the packet and smiled, and just like that, we started over. For the next few weeks, Derek came by every Saturday. We worked side by side, planting rows of tomatoes, staking new vines, feeding Marvin and beans, and building a new compost system behind the barn. He didn't talk much about his mom, I didn't ask. Some ghosts don't need to be chased. They just need to be left behind. But one morning, as we sat on overturned buckets drinking sweet tea, he finally said it. She never apologized. Not once. I nodded slowly. She probably never will. He looked down at the dirt between his boots. "I don't want to be like that. I want to build something real." "You already are," I said. "Out here, everything's real. Dirt doesn't lie. Neither do roots." He nodded, eyes glassy. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. And for a young man who once stood on my porch with a gun, it was everything. Meanwhile, Karen's trial made headlines. She was convicted of 2 counts of document forgery impersonation with intent to defraud and criminal trespass. Her sentence, 3 years probation, 400 hours of community service, and a court-mandated psychiatric evaluation. She lost her home, she lost her board seat, and she lost the power she used to abuse others. Some people in the community felt sorry for her. Others celebrated her downfall. I didn't feel either. What I felt was relief, and that was enough. The Pine Meadow Ranch slowly became more than just my home. The interview from the news had opened doors. Teachers brought students for outdoor science lessons. A local gardening club asked to use the old greenhouse for free workshops. And twice a month, we hosted small gatherings under the cedar tree. Veterans, farmers, kids, seniors, just people finding peace in a place the world tried to take away. I never asked for any of it, but sometimes the best things grow where the soil was broken. One late afternoon in June, Susan and Rick joined me for a backyard dinner. We grilled ribs, passed around corn on the cob, and laughed until the stars showed up. Derek came too. He brought a tray of cupcakes he'd made himself, still half burned, but it was the thought that counted. Rick raised a glass. "To the man who stood his ground," he said, nodding to me, "and to the ranch that proves some things are still worth fighting for." I looked around at my friends, at Derek, at the long stretch of land that had once been quiet and empty, and was now full of voices and life. I raised my glass back to peace and to never letting an HOA decide who you are. Laughter echoed into the hills. As the night wore on, I sat alone for a moment by Lisa's cedar tree. Fireflies blinked in the dark. The vineyard rustled softly in the breeze. I whispered, "We did it, sweetheart. We kept it. We made it better." The wind moved through the leaves like an answer. A new sign now hung proudly on the ranch fence, burned into solid oak, bold and clear. Pine Meadow Ranch, home of resilience, kindness, and one very stubborn old man, established with love, defended with truth, and right underneath in smaller letters, "Not now, not ever, part of any HOA." So if you're driving down an old road in Northern California and you see a vineyard hugged by hills, 2 goats on patrol, and a silver-haired man waving from a porch swing, you'll know you found it. The land they tried to steal, the ranch they couldn't break, and the home that kindness rebuilt. Thank you for watching my story. I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And have you ever had to stand up to a bully even when the law wasn't on your side? Drop your story in the comments. Let's share. Let's support. Because sometimes peace has to be protected like a treasure. And sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest stand. See you next story.